Well, good morning. My name is Gerry Barr. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Council for International Cooperation. And I'm joined here this morning by Stephen Staples, President of the Rideau Institute, and Clare Demerse, Acting Director for Climate Change at the Pembina Institute, who is here this morning to help us with climate financing issues. The budget is barely days away, and the early signs are challenging. There's quite a bit of evidence that could anchor the impression that when it comes to spending on global files, the Canadian government priorities may not reflect the kind of Canada that Canadians identify as their own. Canada is among the most robustly recovering economies in the industrial world, and yet has chosen this moment to freeze aid spending, so there is no hope going forward as that the budget will meet its global responsibilities as an aid donor. In fact, it will, after years of modest progress, turn the corner into negative territory. Canada's aid contribution, about $5.5 billion in 2010, represents 0.32 of gross national income, less than half the internationally accepted donor target of 0.7%. It will slide in coming years to 0.28 as this budgetary freeze bites, and Canada will probably assume a new position at the back of the line where the world's least generous donors can be found. Le gel des dépenses en matière d'aide étrangère place le Canada en queue de peloton. Le budget fédéral marquera le début du gel de l'aide étrangère, environ 5,4 milliards de dollars, soit 0,32 du revenu national brut canadien. Malgré les modestes augmentations récentes, le Canada a glissé au 18e rang du classement des 23 pays donateurs. Ce gel de dépenses devrait faire diminuer l'effort du Canada en matière d'APD à 0,28 de RNB d'ici 2014, l'un des plus bas parmi tous les donateurs officiels. The priorities are just out of line. Canada is spending more on defense than at any time since World War II, and that spending is picking up speed. I'd like to turn to Steve Staples to say a word about that.
Thank you, Gerry. Good morning. My name's Steve Staples. I'm the president of the Rideau Institute. 12 years of budget increases have left Canadian military spending higher at any time since the end of the Second World War, as Gerry points out, according to a new study published by our colleagues at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives just last week. According to this study by Bill Robinson, who is also a senior advisor to the Rideau Institute, Canada will spend at least $22.3 billion on its military forces in 2010-2011, an increase of 54% since 9/11. In actual dollars, Canada is the 13th largest military spender in the world and 6th highest amongst NATO. NATO members are reducing spending now, and Canada is quite a bit out of step by planning to increase its spending. We are alongside, though, Poland, Luxembourg, and Albania as countries planning to increase their military spending as a percentage of gross domestic product. Canada's mission in Afghanistan has absorbed a significant part of the increases in Canadian military spending. But this has come at the cost of Canada's ability to contribute internationally, especially to UN peacekeeping operations, and its ability to fund non-military contributions to global security and humanitarian action. Canada currently contributes just 56 military personnel to UN peacekeeping operations, making Canada 60th on the list of 102 contributing countries. In fact, today, we can fit all of our UN peacekeepers on a single school bus. If the extra $90 to $110 billion that this government has committed itself to spend over the next 17 years through the Canada First Defence Strategy were spent instead on aid, it would enable Canada to meet its 0.7% official development assistance target. And there would still be money left over to provide additional resources for climate change aid. Canada could make a much greater contribution to global security and humanitarian action by shifting resources to non-military security efforts and to peacekeeping operations. And such a shift would really make Canada truly a great power in the world of development assistance and humanitarian aid. And this is an arena in which Canada could really punch above its weight on issues crucial to human welfare and global security. Now invite Clare Demerse to come to the podium.
Thanks very much. So my name is Clare Demerse. I'm the Acting Director of the Climate Change Program at the Pembina Institute, which is a sustainable energy think tank. And I'm here today to talk about financial support for climate action in developing countries, which is an issue that can sometimes be overlooked when environmental groups talk about all the domestic concerns that we also have concerning climate change. But this is in fact an obligation that's existed for a very long time. Rich countries accepted this obligation when the UN Climate Convention was first negotiated. It was reaffirmed in a more specific way in 2009 in Copenhagen and last year in Cancun. Poorer countries need this support to adapt to the impacts of climate change. For example, it could support malaria nets in new regions as the disease spreads. Developed countries promised in 2009 to provide $10 billion a year for the next 3 years in Fast Start financing. The funding was supposed to be new, additional, and balanced between adaptation and emission reduction goals. Last year, Canada announced a 2010 contribution of $400 million. The government explained this was Canada's fair share, since Canada traditionally provides about 4% of total funding for global efforts. From our perspective, $400 million could well be Canada's fair share if it were delivered effectively. Unfortunately, there were some sizable problems with the government's 2010 approach. It turned out to be not quite as originally advertised. First of all, just 11% of the total was dedicated to adaptation efforts. For the world's poorest people, adaptation to the impacts of climate change that they're already feeling is the overwhelming priority. We don't necessarily believe that balanced has to mean a 50-50 split, but 11% comes up short against anyone's definition of balanced. Secondly, 72% of Canada's total financing was in the form of loans to the World Bank's private sector lending arm. We would agree there's some role for loans in clean energy development, but there's also a huge need for grant funding to get the right kinds of policies in place and to build capacity in lower income countries. For these reasons, we would like to see the overwhelming majority of Canada's financing provided as grants, not loans. If Canada does continue to use loans in 2011 and beyond, we need more transparency about those loans. We need to be able to understand what fraction of them are what they would be equivalent to as grants, and how the government is defining clean energy, which can be quite a broad category and mean very different things to different people. Then there are the essential questions of new and additional. In 2010, some of Canada's financing contribution came from the government's increase to the aid budget. But that increase fulfilled the commitment the government made in 2002, so it's a stretch to call it new money. In 2011 and 2012, Canada should provide its climate financing contributions from truly new funds outside of the total existing budgetary commitments to official development assistance. That's because fighting climate change hasn't made fighting poverty or investing in health and education any less important or any easier. So we need both a growing ODA budget and new climate financing contributions. Of course, these questions of additionality have only become more important because of the government's decision to freeze aid spending. There are many ways to raise truly additional funding, often while reducing greenhouse gas pollution. So my colleagues have pointed out, budgets are one of the most important ways that we can understand a government's priorities. Providing Canada's fair share of climate financing in a transparent and an effective way would help to build trust at the international negotiations, show some much-needed leadership from Canada in tackling climate change on the world stage. On the other hand, failing to provide Canada's fair share would send the opposite message. It would not be well received by developing countries at the negotiating table or by groups like ours here at home. Financing is going to be a huge part of the international negotiations this year on climate change. If Canada wants to avoid some of the criticism it has faced in recent years on the world stage, this is an area where we can really make a difference. So we'll be watching carefully on Tuesday to see whether Canada lives up to its commitment in this federal budget. That means providing the grant equivalent of $400 million for 2011 and the same for 2012, making sure the funding is new and additional so that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, increasing the share of that funding dedicated to adaptation, increasing the share of grants, being transparent about any loans the government does provide, and making sure that poor communities have a real say in how the funds are spent. Some funds do this much better than others, and we would like to see Canada support leading approaches, like the UN's Adaptation Fund. Thank you very much. Merci.
Well, thanks so very much. Canadians are concerned about the economy, and rightly so. But they also want effective action to deal with global poverty and with climate change and to promote peace. The coming budget is one that risks being out of step with Canadian values and the vision that they have of Canada's role in the world. A budget in sync with Canadians would make a 10-year commitment to grow aid to the 0.7% internationally accepted aid target. It would reallocate military spending, including F-35 jet spending, towards this compelling aid goal, and to make a genuinely additional increase in climate financing after 2012. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Okay, well, thank you very much.